On the first night, she memorized everything. The front door, the window above the woodpile, the hole in the cellar wall wide enough for a body to slip through. 4 years, 4 owners, 4 returns. She had learned one thing with perfect consistency. Knowing the way out was the only thing that had ever truly belonged to her. The market of Dustfall smelled like dried blood and old leather. It always did in winter. The stalls crowded together under grey skies, merchants breathing clouds of white into the cold air, their voices sharp and fast like the crack of a whip. Animals lowed somewhere behind the main row. Smoke rose from iron barrels where men warmed their hands and said nothing kind to anyone. Mira stood at the edge of the livestock pen, though she was not livestock. At least, no one had called her that out loud. Not yet today. She was tall for anyone's standards, nearly 2 meters of green skin and quiet eyes the color of river moss. Her hair fell in long, dark braids down her back, threaded with small bone beads that her mother had given her before the first sale 7 years ago. She was 16 then. She was 20 now, and the beads were all that remained. The man who had brought her to this market was named Tollus. He had a round belly and a thin mouth and the habit of looking at people the way a farmer looks at a calf that hasn't grown the way he hoped. Difficult, he told anyone who asked. He said it the way other men said broken or lame, just a single word, dropped like a stone, and people nodded and moved on. She had been returned 4 times, always for the same reason, difficult. She did not argue, which seemed to confuse people. She did not weep or beg, which confused them more. She simply waited. She had become very good at waiting, and while she waited, she memorized. The pen had 3 exits, a main gate facing the market road, a side latch near the water trough, rusty but workable, a gap in the far fence post, wide enough that a careful person moving low and quiet could be gone before anyone thought to look. She filed it all away without blinking. It was as natural as breathing now. Every room, every yard, every barn she had ever entered. Catalogued, mapped, kept somewhere deep and still inside her, like a second heartbeat. That was what they called difficult. She did not understand why a person memorizing exits was a problem, unless the people who owned her already knew the exits were worth memorizing. The cold bit at her through the thin hide vest Tollus had given her for the market. Presentable, he'd said, though it barely reached her ribs. She kept her arms still. She kept her face still. She watched. Across the row of stalls, a man was arguing with a grain merchant about the price of dried corn. He was not remarkable at first glance. Medium height for a human, which meant he reached her shoulder. A wide-brimmed hat the color of dust. A coat that had been brown once and was now something harder to name. He walked with a slight drag in his left boot, barely there, the kind of thing most people never noticed. She noticed. She also noticed his right hand when he shoved it into his coat pocket, or tried to. The hand moved wrong. 2 fingers on the outside were gone from the second knuckle. Old scars, pink and smooth. Something had taken them clean. He paid for his corn without looking at the price twice, tucked the sack under his arm, and turned. His eyes found her the way most men's eyes did, cataloguing, calculating. Then he looked at Tollus. "That one," he said, jerking his chin. "She been here long?" "Since morning," Tollus said, brightening. "Strong, healthy. I'll be honest with you, she's got a streak." "How much?" Tollus named a price. The man paid it without haggling, which made Tollus blink in surprise. He wrote nothing down, signed nothing. He simply turned back to her and said, in a voice that was lower and less interested in impressing anyone, "You got things?" She had the beads in her hair, that was all. "No," she said. "All right." He picked up his corn sack again. "Wagon's south end of the row. Brown mule. You can walk or ride, don't matter to me." He did not wait to see which she chose. She watched him go for 3 seconds. Then she looked at the gap in the far fence post, the side latch, the main gate. She looked at his back, growing smaller toward the south end of the market row. She walked after him. His name was Cal Duran. She learned this not because he introduced himself, but because a man at the south gate called out to him as the wagon rolled past. "Hey, Durin, you bag anything last month?" Ma and the man in the dust-brown coat lifted 2 fingers from the reins in a gesture that meant either yes or don't ask, and kept driving. He was a bounty hunter. She had guessed as much from the rifle behind the seat and the folded papers tucked into the inside pocket of his coat, which she had seen when he reached for his money at the market. Names on those papers, numbers beside the names. He did not explain himself. He did not explain her situation, or what he expected, or where she would sleep, or what would happen if she didn't do what he said. He drove in silence through the grey afternoon, while the dustfall market shrank behind them, and the open desert spread out ahead, pale and vast under a low sky. She sat on the far edge of the bench and kept her hands in her lap. The ride took most of the day. The land changed slowly around them, from the packed dirt roads near town to the red stone flats further out, broken by dry brush and the occasional skeleton of a dead tree. The wind picked up around midday and threw dust against the side of the wagon. He pulled his hat lower. She turned her face into it without flinching. The house appeared in the late afternoon, a low square structure of dark wood and pale stone, tucked against a ridge, half hidden by a cluster of dry juniper. It was not large, it was not falling apart. There was a cellar door on the south side, a barn slightly further back, a well near the east wall. She was memorizing before the wagon stopped moving. Front door, heavy wood iron hinges, no visible lock. She catalogued it and kept her expression flat. He climbed down and tied the mule without ceremony. "Inside is inside," he said, which she took to mean she could go in. She stepped through the front door and stood very still. The room was plain, a table with 2 chairs, a stone hearth, a shelf of supplies, canned goods, rope, dried herbs in cloth pouches. A cot against one wall with a folded blanket. He had added a second cot, she realized, newer wood, freshly cut, the blanket still creased from folding. She moved slowly through the room. Kitchen area at the back. A door there. She tested it gently with 2 fingers. It swung open to the outside. Cold air came in. No lock. She let it close and moved to the window on the west wall. Latched from inside with a simple hook. She pressed it with 1 finger and it lifted. No lock. She stood there for a moment, one hand on the window frame, the cold evening air touching her skin. She went to the cellar door, interior, near the hearth. She opened it. Stone stairs going down into the dark. She listened. Nothing moved down there. When she came back up, he was standing in the doorway eating a strip of dried meat and watching her with an expression she could not read. "Checking the place?" he asked. She said nothing. He shrugged and went to the hearth. She stood in the middle of the room and completed her count. Front door, no lock. Back door, no lock. West window, hook latch, no lock. Cellar, no lock. Barn, she would check tomorrow. She stood very still, running the map through her mind. Something did not fit. He was not a careless man. She could see that in the way he'd packed the supplies, the way the rifle was cleaned and oiled behind the seat. He was careful. He was deliberate. And yet, not a single door in the house had a key. She lay down on the new cot that night with the blanket pulled up and both eyes open, and she waited for the thing she had missed. 3 days passed. On the first morning she rose before he did and went to the barn. There was the mule, a second horse she hadn't seen at the market, grey with a branded shoulder, and a shelf of tools along the eastern wall, a gap where 2 boards had warped apart at the far end, low to the ground but wide enough. She marked it and came back inside. He was making coffee. He did not ask where she had been. "There's firewood at the south side needs splitting," he said. She split the firewood. She was efficient, and he watched for about 30 seconds before going back inside, which told her he was either satisfied or not particularly concerned either way. On the second day, she walked the perimeter of the property. There was a section of posts near the eastern corner where the wood had been replaced recently, newer grain, set shallower than the rest. She could pull one loose with 2 hands and a good angle. She marked it and came back to the house. He was cleaning the rifle at the table. She made something from the pantry. Flatbread, because she had done it enough times in other houses to know the ratios by feel. He ate it without commenting. That evening, she asked, "What do you need me for?" He looked up from the rifle. He seemed to turn the question over. "Cooking," he said. "Keeping the place. I'm away a lot." She waited. "That's it," he added, as if he'd heard a second question she hadn't asked. She went to her cot. On the 3rd day it rained, slow and cold, turning the yard to dark mud. She stayed inside and sorted through the pantry supplies, reorganizing by use and weight, which was how she had always been taught. She found a tin of dried apple slices in the back of the shelf, old but still good. She made a broth and added them and set the pot over the fire. He came in mid-afternoon, coat dark with rain, and stopped when he smelled it. He ate 2 bowls. He said nothing, but he pushed the second bowl back empty, and that was its own kind of language. She was washing the bowls when she felt it, a prickle at the back of her neck, low and familiar, the feeling she always got in the first week somewhere new, the feeling of the countdown, of waiting for the switch to flip, for the voice to change, for the door to close that had been open. She set the bowl down and stood very still. He was behind her at the table, writing something in a small ledger. His pen scratched steadily. The fire popped. The feeling stayed. But nothing happened. That was almost worse. She went to sleep that night and lay in the dark counting exits again. Front door, back door, window, cellar, barn gap, east post. 6 ways out. She knew them all. She did not know why she kept needing to count them when nothing had come yet. In the corner of the room, just above the hearth shelf, there was a totem she hadn't asked about, a bundle of dark feathers and a small carved bone, bound with cord the colour of old blood. It was orc-made. She could tell from the knots. She didn't know what clan. She didn't know what it was protecting or warning against. She looked at it for a long time before she closed her eyes. Whatever was bound in those feathers, it had been in this house longer than she had. The totem was not his. She asked on the 6th day, indirectly, pointing to the shelf and saying, "That was already there when you came." He looked up from his boots, which he was risoling with a piece of stiff leather and a curved needle. "Found it when I bought the place," he said. "Previous owner left it, or whoever was here before them. You know what clan?" "No." She looked at it. "Should I take it down?" he asked. "No," she said, and meant it. Whatever it was, it had been there long enough. Moving it felt wrong, in the way that moving old things always felt wrong, like breaking a sentence someone hadn't finished yet. He went back to his boot. She went back to the beans she was sorting. The 7th day, he left before sunrise. She knew because she heard the grey horse at the barn in the dark, and then hooves going north up the stone road. She lay still and listened to the silence settle after him, alone in the house. She rose and dressed slowly. She checked the front door, back door, window. She stood in the middle of the room in the cold, grey light and waited for something to change. Nothing changed. She lit the fire, she made coffee, she swept the floor. The day had a quality she didn't have a word for, not dangerous, not peaceful exactly, more like held, like a breath that didn't know whether to come in or go out. She went to the barn and brushed the mule. She sharpened the 2 knives she found in the kitchen drawer, because the edge on both was almost gone, and that bothered her. She refolded the canvas tarps in the barn corner, which had been stored damp and would rot if left that way. At mid-afternoon, she sat on the front step in a thin slice of winter sun and looked out at the flat red land. There was no sound except wind. She realized she had not checked the exit since morning. It was such a small thing that she almost missed it. She had been in the house alone all day, and she had not once run the count. She had not stood at each door. She had not touched the window latch. The realization arrived quietly, the way cold does, not all at once, just a slow settling into the bones. She checked them now, methodically, going room to room. Everything the same, everything open, But the needing had come after the noticing, not before. That was different. She sat back down on the step and looked at her hands. The bone beads in her hair clicked faintly in the wind. She thought about the 4 houses before this one, the way she had learned in each of them that the worst never announced itself. It arrived sideways. It arrived in the change of a voice's temperature, in the moment a door that had been opened was simply closed. She had been waiting for that moment here. She was still waiting. But there was a tiredness behind the waiting now that hadn't been there in the first week. A tiredness that felt, if she let herself name it honestly, less like fear and more like someone who has been standing guard for so long they can't quite remember why they're still holding the weapon. He came back after dark, cold and empty-handed from the look of it. No mark caught. She had left food on the hearth. He ate it without asking who it was for. She watched him from her cot, pretending to sleep, and thought, he bought me on a weekday morning, paid without arguing, and fed me without requiring anything yet. She did not know what to do with that. 2 weeks, somewhere in the 2nd week, a thing happened that she couldn't name at the time and would only understand later. It was a morning like the others. Cold start, grey sky, the mule restless in the barn. She was kneading dough at the table when he came in from outside with a cut across his left palm, not deep but steady, bleeding into his sleeve. He went to the shelf for the cloth he used as bandaging and spent about 30 seconds trying to wrap his own hand with his good fingers and his 2-fingered right hand and making a poor job of it. She put down the dough and crossed the room without deciding to. She took the cloth from him, not roughly, just efficiently, and wrapped the cut the way she had been taught in the 2nd house, where there had been animals always getting themselves into wire. He let her. He held his hand still and looked at the wall. When she tied it off, he said, "Thank you." She went back to the dough. It was not a large moment, but it sat with her the rest of the day in a way she could not explain. A small weight in the chest, not painful, more like a coin placed there carefully. On the 12th day, a man came to the house. He arrived on a spotted horse in the early afternoon, while Cal was out checking the north pasture. The man was heavy-set, a thick grey beard, and he wore a lawman's badge on his chest that had seen better decades. She answered the door because she heard the horse coming. He looked at her the way most men from Dustfall did, the too long second glance that tried to decide what category to put her in. Then he said, "Cal Durin about." "North pasture," she said, "won't be back till dusk." He nodded slowly, still watching her. "You the one he bought at Tollis's?" She didn't answer. He smiled the kind of smile that wasn't one. "Word gets around. You know what he does for work?" She waited. "Brought in 3 marks last season," the man said. "Clean jobs, no extra mess." He paused. Man like that draws attention, not all of it friendly. He was watching her face for something. She gave him nothing. "You tell him Varric stopped by. He'll know what it means." He rode out without waiting for a response. She stood in the doorway until the dust settled, then went back to the hearth. When Cal returned at dusk, she told him, "Varric stopped by, said you'd know what it means." His face changed in a way she had seen once before. Not fear, but the kind of stillness that comes just before something sharpens. "When?" he asked. "Midday." He went to the window and looked out at the dark yard for a long moment. "You didn't leave?" he asked, and it came out odd, not accusing, more like he hadn't meant to say it out loud. "No," she said. He turned and looked at her fully for the first time in days. She looked back. There was something in the air between them that neither named, like the totem above the hearth, old and still, and waiting to be understood. He nodded once, then moved to clean his rifle. She went to her cot and lay in the dark, and somewhere between one breath and the next, she noticed that the Count had not come that day, not once. The exits were in her, filed and still, but she hadn't reached for them. She let the thought settle without pulling at it, and closed her eyes. The name Varric opened something cold. Over the next 3 days, Cal was quieter in a different way, not the usual measured quiet, but a compressed one, the kind that builds pressure. He sharpened the knife he kept on his belt twice in one afternoon, which she had not seen him do before. He spent a full morning going through the rolled bounty papers in his coat, laying them out on the table, reading them with his jaw set. She learned in pieces, without asking directly. Varick was a former lawman who had crossed into a different kind of work, the kind where men were paid not to find outlaws but to protect them, and to deal with the ones who got too close. He had lost money when Cal had brought in one of his protected marks. He had sent word before, according to a passing rider who stopped for water on the second day and spoke briefly to Cal by the barn. She listened from the window. She also noticed, those 3 days, that Cal checked the rifle before bed each night, but he did not change any of the doors. Not one lock added, not one latch secured. She didn't understand him. On the 3rd evening she asked, "Why don't you lock the doors?" He looked up from the rifle. He seemed to consider whether the question deserved an answer. Then, "I've been in places where everything was locked from the outside," he said. "I don't want a place like that." She looked at him for a long time. He went back to the rifle. She went to her cot, but she did not sleep for a while. She lay in the dark and turned that sentence over. "I've been in places where everything was locked from the outside." She didn't know his story. She didn't know the 2 missing fingers, or the drag in the left boot, or anything else that had made him the specific man he was. But she recognized something in those words, the way you recognize a smell from long ago. Not the memory exactly, just the weight of it. On the 4th day, Varick's men came. There were 3 of them, mid-morning, coming from the eastern approach. She saw the dust before she heard the horses and said, from the kitchen window, "3 riders, Eastern Road." He was beside her in seconds. They watched together through the glass. The riders came slowly, which was worse than fast. Fast meant impulsive. Slow meant they had already decided something. "Go to the barn," Cal said quietly. "Stay low." She looked at him. "Please," he added. She went through the back door and crossed the yard without running. In the barn, she moved to the far corner, behind the grey horse, and crouched low. Through the warped gap in the boards, the one she had measured on the first morning, wide enough for a body, she could see a slice of the front yard. The 3 men dismounted. Words were exchanged. She couldn't hear all of it, but the tones were clear enough, a threat being delivered in the language of courtesy, the way dustful men did when they wanted to make sure everyone understood who held the weight. Cal's voice stayed level throughout. At one point, the largest rider took a step forward. She saw Cal's hand move, not to the gun, just near it. The rider stopped. Eventually, the 3 men remounted. They left the way they came, slowly, deliberately, so there was no doubt it was a choice and not a retreat. She stayed in the barn until the dust was gone, then walked back to the house. Cal was standing at the kitchen table with both hands flat on the surface, breathing slowly. She came in and stood across from him. "They'll come back," he said. "I know," she said. They looked at each other across the table. Outside, the wind moved through the juniper with a sound like something far away sighing. Above the hearth, the bone and feather totem swayed. She dreamed of the totem that night. In the dream, the bones were singing, not with mouths, just vibrating, a low hum like a wasp caught in a jar. She stood in the dark room of the dream and looked at it, and it looked back, which was wrong because it had no eyes. Then it said, in a voice that was not a voice, "This house has been waiting for someone to stop running." She woke before dawn. She lay still and looked at the ceiling and did something she had not done since the first week. She ran the count, front door, back door, window, cellar, barn gap, east post, but something had changed. She ran through them not as escape routes. She ran through them the way a person checks a list of things that belong to them, the way you inventory what's yours. She sat up slowly in the dark. The fire had burned to coals. The room was dim and warm. Across the space on the other cot, she could hear Cal breathing, the slow, even breath of someone genuinely asleep, not faking it. She got up and went to the hearth and added 2 logs. She crouched there and watched the coals catch, and she let herself think something she had not let herself think before. I have not needed to use any of those exits, not once. Not for a threat, not for a door that locked at night, not for a voice that changed temperature, not for anything. The exits were still there, but in all the weeks she had been here, not once had she needed them. She stayed by the fire until grey light came through the window. When Cal woke, she had coffee ready. He took the cup and sat at the table and rubbed his face and said nothing for a while, which she now recognized as just how he was in the morning. "I need to go into town," he said finally. "Varick's going to make a formal move. I know how he works. I need to get ahead of it." "When?" "Tomorrow morning." She nodded. "You don't have to be here when I get back," he said. Not cruelly, just flat, the way he said most things, as a fact being reported, not a feeling being expressed. She looked at him. He was looking at the table. "I know Varick's men saw you. If they report back that there's someone here, it puts you in the middle of something that isn't yours." She let the silence sit for a moment. "It was mine, the second I answered that door," she said. He looked up. "I answered it," she said again, more quietly. "I stayed." He said nothing, but something shifted in his face. Not much, just a small movement behind the eyes, like a door opening a crack. Later, he went out to walk the property's edge. She stood in the middle of the room and realized she had not counted exits once since she woke up. She had counted them last night, but that was different. That was inventory. That was hers. She reached up and touched one of the bone beads in her hair. Her mother's. Worn smooth from years of her thumb, finding it in moments that needed steadying, and she stood there in the quiet, warm room and let that be what it was. He left at sunrise. She watched the grey horse until the red flats took it, and then she went back inside. She sat at the table with coffee and the particular quiet of a house, without another person in it, different from being alone in a field or a barn, which was open quiet. This was contained. This was a quiet that kept its shape. She thought about what she needed to do. If Varick moved, he would move through official channels first. That was how men like him worked. Dustfall men with badges, or the shadows of badges. They would file something, or call something in, or tell a story that made Cal's work look like something other than what it was. She did not have power in Dustfall. She had no name anyone there respected, no coin to place, no leverage. What she had was this: she could read a room, and she had been reading rooms her entire life. She spent the morning going through the rolled papers on the table, the ones Cal had laid out 3 days ago. She was not illiterate. The second house had had a large family and a daughter who taught her to read without meaning to, the way children do things, carelessly and generously. 3 names, bounties placed by different parties, all current. 2 of them with notes in Cal's cramped hand. Payment confirmed, closed. The third was active. She found the third file, opened it fully. Goran Massey, a name she didn't know, but the notes indicated Massey was connected to Varick, not protected by him, which was interesting. Controlled by him, rather, which meant Massey's capture would cut something. She folded the paper and set it aside. That afternoon, she prepared. She packed a small saddlebag, dried food, the second water skin, the road knife she'd been sharpening. Not because she was leaving, but because if Cal came back cornered and they needed to move fast, she wanted to be ready. She checked the rifle behind the door. She had been watching him clean it long enough to know the parts. She checked the load, set it back. At dusk, she heard hooves. She moved to the window before she thought about it. 1 horse, not 3. She exhaled. He came in looking tired and something else, not rattled, but changed, like a man who had walked into a room expecting a fist fight and found a piece of paper instead. "Varick filed a complaint with the territory office," he said. "Claimed I brought in Massey's brother outside jurisdiction." "Did you?" "No, but it'll stick long enough to slow me down unless I can counter it." He set his hat on the table. "I need Marcy." She slid the folded paper across the table. He looked at it. "East Road," she said. "3rd marker past the ridge, according to the notes. That's where the job was placed. You wrote it in the margin. He looked at the paper for a long time. I read them, she said, not apologizing. I see that. He turned the paper over in his hands. Something moved in his face again. That same small opening she'd seen before, only wider this time. Outside, the night was very still. The totem above the hearth hung without moving, the cord binding it dark in the firelight. She had the sense she couldn't explain it, couldn't trace it to any single thing, that whatever had been waiting in this house had stopped waiting. That something had, very quietly, arrived. He rode out early to find Mass and came back by afternoon. She didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. He came in steady on his feet, which told her enough. They ate dinner. He talked, which was unusual. Not much. Just a few sentences about the territory office and what the counter-filing would look like, and how it would likely end Varick's reach in this part of the district. She listened and said the few things that needed saying. When the plates were cleared and the fire was low, she sat across from him at the table with her coffee and said, "I stopped." He looked up. Memorizing the exits, she let that sit. I didn't notice until after. It had already been weeks. He looked at her the way people look when they're trying to understand the size of something, whether it fits the scale they're used to or requires a different one entirely. "I don't know what that means," he said, which was honest. She did not explain it. She had spent 4 years in houses where every room was a calculation, where the body kept its own ledger, distance to the door, angle of a hallway, depth of a yard at night. It was not something you chose, it was something you became, and you didn't notice it the way you don't notice holding your breath until you finally let it go and realize how long you've been doing it. Somewhere in the weeks behind her, without deciding to, she had exhaled. She did not tell him that, not because it was a secret, but because it was not yet a thing that fit into words easily, and she had learned, over time, to only say the things she could say cleanly. He nodded once, slowly, the way he did when he was filing something away, rather than responding to it. Outside, the night was the color of iron. The cold had settled fully over the red flats, and somewhere north, wind moved through the canyon in a sound like far-off water. She thought about the totem. This house has been waiting for someone to stop running. She was not sure she believed in the kind of spirits that put words in bones, but she believed in the kind of truth that found its way out, regardless of what vessel it used. She turned her coffee cup in her hands. The bone beads in her hair clicked once, softly. "I'll stay through spring," she said. He said nothing, but he did not look away. "After that," she said, "I don't know." "After that is after that," he said, which was its own kind of answer. She went to her cot that night and lay in the dark with her eyes open for a while, not counting anything, just listening to the fire and the wind and the small sounds of a house that was simply a house. She did not reach for the exits in her mind. She did not need to. She thought about the gap in the east post, the loose board she had never pulled, the window latch she had lifted on the first night and never opened, the back door that swung freely in its frame, the same as it always had, unasked and unlocked. They were still there. They would always be there, but they were no longer the most important things she knew about this place. She closed her eyes. Somewhere north of the canyon, beyond the reach of the firelight, something moved through the dark, far away still and quiet. A rider, maybe, or a memory of one, or something older, following a different kind of road. Whatever it was not here yet. And tonight, for the first time in 4 years, not here yet was enough. Did you enjoy the story? Subscribe to the channel to watch more stories like this one. Leave a like, it helps the channel a lot. And drop a comment down below. I always read them and use your feedback to make our content better. Thanks so much. Orc-Bound Legacy.